Kia ora and welcome. Graham Smith from ALEC here. This presentation takes you through what you need to know about part 4 of the NCALNE VOC. So this relates to diagnostic assessment, and here we're looking at the kind of content that you need to cover and the evidence that you need to generate for this part of the qualification. So make sure you've got your study guide or your assessment guide that you can delve into when you need a bit more information. Okay, just a quick heads up, if you have a look at the infographic on the screen there at the top, in the 12 o'clock position you can see number 4, section 4 on diagnostic. So that's where we're up to. We've travelled through the New Zealand context and Māori literacy and numeracy. We've looked at mapping the demands of your training, and now we're looking at diagnostic assessment, and that's of course to do with knowing the learner. Okay, here's what you need to cover. You need to have some approaches, methods, tools that are going to help you to know your learner. So the way we do it with this particular part of the qualification, it's about using appropriate diagnostic tools for your learners. And we recommend that you use a combination of two things. One is using the TEC assessment tool with your learners, hopefully the online version, but the paper-based version if you can't get online and use it. And the second thing is using your own teacher-made mini diagnostic tools for both literacy and numeracy. We also want you to map your learners, so using these tools, gathering some data, and then based on that information, mapping your learners. Just like you mapped the demands of your training, this part is about trying to figure out where your learners are at in that same system. And then you use this information to develop learning plans for your learners. So, quick question, what is diagnostic, or what does this word diagnostic mean? And it's simply a process that we use to identify something. I mean, in medicine, we talk about diagnostic testing. It's a way of figuring out what's wrong with someone, what the problem is. So it doesn't quite work in education, but the idea is, I think you get the idea. So we use diagnostic assessment in literacy and numeracy to identify specific skill gaps or needs. So here we're talking about specific literacy gaps or specific numeracy gaps and needs. So the diagnostic question helps you answer a question like, what's the problem here? Diagnostic assessment might be a specific check on a particular skill. So it might have a narrow focus, and that's the kind of focus we want you to take when it comes to creating your own mini diagnostics, or it can be a broad indicator of general areas that need attention. And that's the focus with the TEC assessment tool. It's like the broad brushstrokes, it's the big picture diagnostics. So you need those two things working together. It's probably a good idea at this point just to compare some different kinds of assessments so you know what we're talking about. Here's how we like to think about the 3 different kinds of assessment. So here we've got if you have a look at that green arrow and think of it as a race, and you're the photographer taking photographs of the participants who are running the race. So at the beginning of the race, at the start of the race, you take a snapshot with your camera, and that's what we call initial assessment, and it can also be diagnostic assessment as well. So it's initial because that might be the first time that you've been able to talk to your learners and work with your learners, but at the same time it's diagnostic because you're trying to figure out where they're at and what they need to carry on. Now further along the way, halfway through the race, you take another snapshot with your camera, and we're going to call that formative assessment and also diagnostic assessment. It's formative because it's still forming and informing how you are teaching. It's diagnostic because you're still figuring out, you're still asking the question, what are the needs here? What are the skill gaps here? And you're still in the race. There's still hopefully plenty of time to do some work with your participants. And then at the end of the race, another kind of assessment that we call summative assessment. And that's when you take a snapshot when they cross the finish line. Now, with this training, with the NCALNE, we're mainly concerned with the diagnostic side of things, in particular the formative diagnostic assessment. So our time frame is usually quite short, so we're interested in taking a couple of snapshots of your learners along the way. First of all, to measure where they're at, and then for you to work with them and do some training, and then to measure how much they've moved. Okay, can you complete the sentence here? What gets measured gets dot dot dot. What gets measured gets managed, and this is something once you start the process of measuring, you'll find all sorts of interesting things happen. It really does help to bring your attention, your focused attention, to the thing that you've decided to measure. On its own, it's not enough, but just the fact that you're starting to measure something is going to help bring attention, bring your own focused attention to the kind of training that you're doing. And if you want an analogy from another area, if you think of weight training or running, fitness or dieting, as soon as you start measuring your number of repetitions or the amount that you're walking or running or your weight, that has the effect that you start noticing other things that go on. You know, how much food you're putting into your body, the kind of food, the kind of exercise you're doing, and so on. So there's lots of benefits to be had just in the process of measuring. And we need you to do it anyway so that you can report what were your learners like before, what were your learners like after you intervened with these very focused literacy and numeracy training interventions that you're going to create. So it's about identifying your learners' strengths and weaknesses. That's what diagnostic assessment is about. It's not necessarily about finding out what's wrong with someone, but it's really to do with finding out where those gaps are, what their needs are. It's also about figuring out what they already know. And you need to do this so that you can make your teaching and training more effective, more targeted. It's the difference between having a shotgun and having a sniper rifle. Okay, just to clarify, I talked about this earlier on, but sometimes it comes up again. It's worth considering the differences between initial and diagnostic. Now, diagnostic assessment might just mean using the TEC assessment tool and perhaps using a couple of your own mini diagnostics. But initial assessment is often something a bit bigger, where you hopefully get a chance to sit down with your learner or your group of learners and have a conversation with them, find out some of their background, find out a bit about them, find out some of the barriers perhaps to future learning for them, find out some of the things that they've actually been successful in with learning as well. So initial assessment can include diagnostic assessment. Well, one of the things that you may need to do if your learners are new to you is really have a go at finding out a bit more about their previous learning and their ability to progress through the training. So it's really a combination of looking back and then looking ahead. So again, those are just some aspects of initial assessment that might be different to just focusing on diagnostic assessment. Different ways of doing initial assessment, different organisations, different people do different things. So part of your initial assessment, which can be informing your diagnostic processes, filling out the application form, filling out the enrolment form, an interview. And if you want to formalise this process a bit more for yourself, it's not too much work to create a checklist. And often you'll already have a checklist in your head of things that you're looking for when someone fills out their application form. So if you write that down, put it into a formal checklist, you can be ticking those things off, and that just standardizes the approach for you. It means you're consistent every time. It means someone else can do the job as well, and they follow the same format that you follow as well. So probably a combination of tools and approaches. Doesn't all have to be contextualized. It can be a combination of some generic assessment processes and some contextualized processes. So don't just rely on the TE assessment tool. Use the TEC assessment tool, but have some other tools in your toolbox as well.